I'm going to be doing the shoulder seams now. This is the back, and these are the two front pieces. And we're doing these right sides together, and then we're going to top stitch them. And I'm just using roughly a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Fleece slips and slides a little bit, so sometimes you need to pin it or clip it. I've sewn it quite a bit. I pretty much can handle it without having to pin or clip. One side's done. Let me do the other shoulder. For the construction seam, I'm just leaving it as the default 2.5 millimeter stitch length. Now that I got the shoulder seams on, I'm just going to do a quick stay stitch for the collar or for the neckline to keep it from getting stretched out while I'm sewing it back and forth. For a stay stitch, you want to go to the maximum stitch length you have, which on my machine is 5. You want to do about 1/4 of an inch or so, or anywhere that as long as it's within the seam allowance. And what this does is this just stabilizes it, so when you're moving it around and sewing it together, the garment, you don't stretch out the neckline. Then some people take this out, some people leave them in. It's up to you when you're done with it. Then when you're doing the stay stitching, you always try and make sure you don't stretch out the fabric, because some of it's on the bias, some of it's with the grain, some of it's across the grain. And I'm finger pressing open the seam because I'm going to be top stitching it open. The shoulder seams. Now you don't have to worry about the neckline being stretched out while you're sewing it. I put the needle back to the center position. This is the shoulder seam. This is the exterior. This is the interior. I just finger pressed open the seam. I'm going to top stitch. I'm just going to top stitch one row on each side of the seam. This is a muslin build, so I'm not really that, making that big of a fuss to make sure it's exactly perfect. Then for top stitching, I'm going to go to a stitch length of 3. It's just a little better looking. And I'm using an open toe embroidery foot, and I just line up this construction seam on the outside of the foot on this side to do this one. Then when I do the line on this one, I'm going to line it up on the other side of the foot. And it gives me just under 1/4 of an inch or so. Trim the thread tails. And this is what the shoulder seam looks like. This is the exterior. Then this is the interior. Top stitch the other shoulder seam. That's why it's a good idea to do the stay stitching, because you tend to move it around a lot. And you could really stretch out a neckline. On a hoodie jacket, not that big of a deal, but if this was like a shirt, t-shirt, it'd be really noticeable. And there we go. Shoulder seams are done. This is the one we just did. Front, back. One thread tail left there. Then I'm just trimming these up a little bit. Don't really have to. But I like to keep it all nice and neat.